Good afternoon and welcome to the Variable Operations and Maintenance Cost Review Working Groups for Gas Resources. My name is Isabella Nicosia from ISO Stakeholder Affairs, and I'll be facilitating the webinar. There are a few other ISO representatives in the room, so I'll have them introduce themselves starting to my left.
I'm Kevin Head. I'm from Market Validation.
Adam Swadley.
Jess Kuna, DMM.
Kyle Wessendorf, DMM.
Tony Sage, Market Validation.
Christina Osborne, Stakeholder Affairs.
This call is being recorded for stakeholder convenience, and the video file will be posted to the ISO website later this week. Today's presentation will also be available on the ISO website on the process webpage by close of business today. We're leaving the lines open for this call, so if you have any questions, please feel free to speak up and start by introducing yourself. If you're not planning to speak, please be sure to manually mute your telephone so we can avoid background noise. With that, I'll hand it over to Kevin.
Hi, everyone. Kevin Head. I'm a market engineering specialist here at the California ISO. I'd like to start by just discussing the high-level purpose of the working groups. First goal is to offer some definitions for comment of a few cost component items, major maintenance costs, variable operations costs, not to be confused with the variable operations and maintenance adder, general and administrative costs. Second goal is to seek your feedback on how to differentiate these different cost components from one another on a technology-specific level. The end goal of this is to consider updates to our variable operations VOM cost adder values and may result in some new definitions being added to our tariff or into our BPMs. All right. A little bit of background on this stakeholder initiative. We have committed to revisit our variable operations and maintenance adder values once every 3 years. At the end of last year, we, along with Nexent, published a report with some updates to these values. We received some stakeholder comments back from that, noting a lack of definitions for major maintenance and VOM in our tariff, as well as some other issues. These issues were related to costs being higher in California than the regions used in Nexent's report. As you know, California faces higher costs due to more stringent environmental restrictions and water being relatively more expensive. There were also issues about how the technology types were grouped in the report. So this slide kind of outlines our current thinking. It's basically that the cost adders are comprised of multiple cost components. And so we'd like to discuss these cost components, which will help kind of illuminate the gray areas. So this we can see diagrammatically here. So we have our cost adders, which are existing in the market, and then those are comprised of various cost components. So starting from the left, the major maintenance adder is comprised of major maintenance costs. Variable operations and maintenance adder is comprised of variable operations costs and the variable component of other maintenance costs. There's fixed operations and maintenance costs, which we don't have an adder for in our market, and these are comprised of general and administrative costs and a fixed component of other maintenance costs. This slide also helps us revisit our goals of defining these three cost component items, as well as seek your feedback on how to differentiate between the fixed and variable component of other maintenance costs, as well as to split between major maintenance costs and the variable component of other maintenance costs. So I'd like to begin with the low-hanging fruit here. These are the ones that are relatively clear-cut and can be dispensed with early on, so we can focus on the sticking points. The first is general and administrative costs. These are costs that are incurred at a plant that do not vary or relate to production. So these types of things are leasing costs, taxes, insurance, and industry-related fees and costs. Next, we have variable operations costs. These are the cost of consumables. These are associated with directly with electrical production and specifically exclude both maintenance and fuel costs. These types of costs are raw water, particularly water used in the steam cycle, waste and wastewater disposal expenses, lubricants that depend on electricity production, chemicals used in plant emission control processes and CO2 capture, such as ammonia, SCR catalysts, and CO oxidation catalysts, as well as any other consumable materials and supplies. So next we have major maintenance costs. This is a concept that's existing in our tariff already, and we have an adder already existent as well. These are costs associated with the extensive maintenance of the prime mover of a generating unit that cannot be done as part of routine maintenance. They must be associated with electrical production such that the cost can be related to run-hour production or the startup of a generating unit. So here comes the tricky part, these other maintenance costs. These are maintenance costs which do not require the generator to undergo an extensive outage and may be characterized as fixed or variable. I'd like to discuss a few of the challenges that we saw in considering these costs. As you know, the long-term service agreements and power purchase agreements are signed with external vendors to perform these operations and maintenance activities. They're often fixed in dollar values, but the underlying activities may indeed vary with electrical production due to wear and tear and heat damage, etc. These agreements may also cover major maintenance activities, which further complicate the separation and classification between maintenance and other major and other maintenance activities. Related to this is the time period under consideration. This is important to delineate fixed versus variable. As you know, in economics, all costs are variable in the long run, but in our markets, which are spot and energy-based markets, market participants should only be compensated for the short-run marginal costs. So how should we define short-run? Defining it in the context of a plant's construction period, say 5 to 15 years, is clearly too long, while a year seems arbitrary and perhaps too long, while the horizons of our markets, a day for the day-ahead markets and fractions of an hour and for the real-time markets seem too short. And finally, we know that if all of these major maintenance activities were to halt, non-major
Oh, there's a little bit of background noise, so just make sure your line's muted.
Thank you. Eventually, production would fall to zero. So in some respects, these costs are correlated to electrical production. So this brings us back to our diagram and our first chance for stakeholders to share their thoughts. We'd like to open the floor to anyone who wants to share their general thoughts on our definitions and our cost components and our current thinking on that. Do you think it's overly simplistic or perhaps splitting hairs? Or do you think we should tend towards prescriptive rules versus broader principles? Great, so open it up to people. Please make sure to identify yourselves when responding if you could.
There are 34 people on the line, just so you guys know.
Are any comments?
Just make sure your phone's not manually muted.
Yeah, this is Ed Espinoza with Puget Sound Energy. As far
Go ahead.
Regulatory tasks that are a requirement, we've been classifying those as a non-BOM type of activity. I believe they probably belong more in the fixed operations and maintenance. I don't know if you went down to that level of granularity as to categorizing that area of maintenance. And that, of course, would include anything having to do with emissions control, environmental, any type of water discharge has to be done in a controlled fashion, requiring a permit. We're considering those as kind of fixed costs, because we know we're going to have to incur them at some point.
Yeah, I think we would agree with that. These are maintenance activities that are required by certain regulations. Yeah, I think we would see those falling into the general and administrative costs and therefore be fixed in nature, as you noted, and not included in either the major maintenance adder or the VOM adder. So, yeah, we agree on that.
Okay. What about corrective maintenance on let's say, BOP equipment?
Yeah, can you give an example of that kind of activity?
Okay, let's say to repack a valve that's leaking past its stem. The only time you would do that is as needed. There isn't a regularly scheduled PM to do that. So these events, these correctives, and they could be planned or unplanned depending on priority. These type of events do occur, but not on a anticipated calendar basis.
Yeah,
I would classify those as a variable maintenance cost. However, anything that is operated is dispatched from, let's say, a CMMS system that is on a calendar basis. Those, I would tend to classify those as fixed.
So this is Janet Phelps, and I'm also with PSC. And I think one of the things that we were wrestling with as we read this latest report is you talk about defining costs as short run, specifically talking about other maintenance. You know, you're looking for what's short run versus long run and kind of how you define short run. And I think some of the difficulty is that when we're doing maintenance on things, we don't necessarily define maintenance in terms of short run or long run. We define them in terms of corrective maintenance, preventive maintenance, predictive maintenance. And so one of our comments is that it might be helpful to think in those terms to help identify which ones are more directly related to energy production. Otherwise, it's pretty hard to just bucket things as short run versus long run.
Yeah, no, it definitely makes sense where you're coming from there. Thanks for those thoughts. We'll take those into consideration.
Hello, it's Jim Perez from City Riverside. Just wanted to extend the question from the gentleman that was talking about regulatory fees. Would you consider the emissions testing that the units have to go through annually as something fixed? I mean, it's a cost component regardless if the unit runs or not. They'll have to do a lot of them will have to do a RADA.
Yeah, I would say those are things. Definitely, you have to do them regardless of your capacity factor.
Correct.
Yeah, I think that's how we've been considering those. Yep.
Yeah, this is Steve St. Clair, also with Puget Sound Energy, and it's true, we consider those kinds of calendar-based maintenance activities, you know, something that's done on a recurring cycle, whether it's every month, every 6 months, every 5 years, whatever that may be, really regardless of runtime, as being fixed costs. And, you know, and Janet raised this point, when we get into more of the predictive or corrective maintenance, these are activities that are done specifically as a part of runtime. And we can back into a cost per service hour or cost per megawatt hour based on that. And so, I mean, that is one way to look at these other maintenance expenses and how you would account for them as a fixed or a variable. And at least in our world, we look at predictive maintenance and also corrective maintenance as being a variable, because but for runtime, we wouldn't do any of those things. A question that I had for you, and I'm sorry, this goes actually back to major maintenance, is that you've got quite a list in the appendix of different components and systems that would be part of your major maintenance definition. And then later, in a different category, you have the LTSA costs. And in many cases, those costs are actually getting to the same maintenance event. Those companies that have an LTSA pay one way, those that do transactional pay for it a different way. And I'm just curious here in terms of how you envision this all working. Is there any advantage or disadvantage to performing these activities, transactional or LTSA, based on market participation? Is there a better way or a worse way, if you will, to participate in the market depending on the kind of economic structure of doing that maintenance work?
Well, I think the market ideally would treat those the same way, regardless of how you're contracting with your external vendors, whether you're under an LTSA or doing it transactionally. I don't know if we can necessarily advise which, any sort of market strategies that would be advantageous under one or the other. But it's a good thought and something that we're taking into consideration and have been when negotiating our major maintenance adder values.
Yeah, I guess more what I was getting at is that you're treating dollars per megawatt hour or dollars per start similarly, regardless of whether that's part of an LTSA or whether that's a transactional cost that's being divided up by megawatt hours or starts. So in your system, those are treated identically, rather than being a bias one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
Right. We're trying to get to the underlying activity, not necessarily how it's paid for.
All right. Thank you. That helps.
Okay.
So this is Susan Hill with Puget. You guys are from Puget. You've just been talking. I'm from Portland. It's been a Monday. I apologize. Is there a move through this? Fundamentally, maintenance is related to either creep or fatigue, right? So it's either a cycling damaging or it's due to a thermal damaging. And one of the things I've seen is maintenance is typically, especially with the LTSAs, the OEMs have recognized that the cycling is your fatigue, so it's $1 per start. And your creep is $1 per hour because the parts have gotten to the point where they're fairly thermally stable, and so it's just a matter of the fact that they're exposed to a high temperature, not a specific high temperature. So I'm curious if this is a move to move maintenance away from $1 per megawatt hour, because technically it's not a load-related generation cost. It's actually an hour. And the way I've seen this done in the past is because we had fairly stable capacity factors, and so it was very easy to take a number of run hours at a stable capacity factor and turn that into $1 per megawatt hour instead of $1 per hour. And so I'm trying to understand if this is, if we're starting to see a move that because of the variable operation of the grid, especially with the fossil-fired units, we're starting to see a move to more of an hour and a starts basis for the maintenance costs and truly grab only those that are a function of load in the $1 per megawatt hour.
I think we'd like to make sure that all of those costs are adequately captured. Traditionally, the major maintenance adder captures costs that are associated with, that are correlated with run hours and starts, and the variable operations and maintenance adder captures those costs which are associated with just megawatt hours. However, I think we might consider being open to adding $1 per megawatt hour into the major maintenance adder category depending on the nature of those major maintenance activities. Do they require you shutting down the plant, for example?
Well,
So
the reason I ask is because the rules are different on the bidding and the bidding strategies and the bidding caps, because the major maintenance hours are locked into the commitment cost and the dollar per megawatt hour are locked into the energy bids. And so I'm trying to understand if this is a shift in policy or actually a contemplation of unlocking some of the commitment costs.
No, the intent is not a shift in policy. It's just that I think there's a lot of gray area on what goes into which cost, and we've heard from different participants that some costs could be classified as $1 per megawatt hour, and a different participant comes in with the same cost and says that's $1 per hour. So we recognize that you can translate between these costs from $1 per hour to $1 per megawatt hour, and I think what we're looking for here is just feedback on which would best represent that cost. Should it go into the $1 per megawatt hour field or should it go into the $1 per hour field? So that's what we're getting feedback on. There's no shift in policy. We're just trying to understand how best to represent these maintenance costs and which buckets to put them into.
Okay, so as an engineer, I will tell you that maintenance is incurred through creep or fatigue, which is not typically related to an actual megawatt hour production. It's related to a firing hour, and it's related to a start. I mean, there are some exceptions. That's not a blanket statement. But if we're comparing everybody's combustion turbine to everybody else's combustion turbine, it's not typically a function of load on the combustion turbine, a megawatt hour basis. So, I mean, physically, that's how the wear and tear is being incurred on a unit. Like I said, there are exceptions. I'm not speaking. We have a turbine that may actually be load related because of the age of the parts. But in general, your boilers, your back end, all of that is it's an off on or it's a cycle off on. It's not a 50% load, 100% load, unless you're discrete engaging new equipment. So an additional booster pump or duct burners or things like that. So, I mean, just as an engineer, the science doesn't really support megawatt hour. It's going to support hours and starts from probably, I'm going to just throw out a guess, probably 80% of the equipment in the fleet.
Yeah, this is Steve with PSE, and I would actually endorse that too. I think the great equalizer for our combustion turbines and, frankly, other kinds of generation too are going to be that service hour and starts. Like you point out, there are, other damage vectors, other, types of wear and tear vectors, but by and large, the two are related to service hours and starts. And so, if we are looking to equalize that across, really a multidimensional fleet as you have participating in the market now, that'd be a great way to do that.
Yeah, this is Jim from UC Riverside. I wanted to think that, yeah, I agree with that, and like to add that there are major components out there that are not turbine-related that are susceptible to failure based on wherever they're at, and it's all tied into the starts. I mean, the SCRs, the more you start that thing, the shorter you're going to get out of it, and as well as a lot of electronic equipment that have life cycles on it. And, it's just a matter of time. It's not a matter of megawatts.
Mm-hmm.
That's helpful. Thank you. That's really helpful.
It's Mark with Calpine. When I can ask a question, let me know.
Yep, please go ahead. Would you mind saying your name again? There was a little feedback on the line there.
Yeah, sorry, it's Mark Smith with Calpine. I'm just leaving the ISO actually in the car, so I apologize. It sounds like you're trying to classify maintenance activities between major maintenance and variable, but I think you've also identified that there are maintenance items that are fixed in nature that aren't either of those. Are you suggesting that generators shouldn't have the ability to recover those costs on a variable basis through their bids? Or are you just saying that those costs need to be allocated either to the variable O&M or to major maintenance?
Are you asking about the fixed maintenance?
Yeah, let's just talk about routine fixed maintenance. Are you suggesting I shouldn't have the ability to include any of that in my bid stack?
So our markets were designed to compensate marginal costs on the short run. So if nothing would change the fact that you were to do those activities or not, then I don't think that would fit into our current market design to be reimbursed for those costs.
I disagree. You're allowing major maintenance, which isn't certainly a marginal cost issue. So what about routine, normal maintenance costs that are real, that units are exposed to, but don't fit nicely into your variable O&M or major maintenance categories? Are you saying we're not allowed to recover those?
Well, we know that there's capacity contracts out there for resource adequacy. The general consensus from the industry literature we've read is that those should be recovered in a capacity type market, or in our case, the bilateral, resource adequacy contracting that occurs.
Okay, so absent a capacity contract, you're not going to allow those to be recovered through your market. All right. Okay, I hear what you're saying. We'll put in comments about that.
Sure. That's the research that we've come across, and that's why we're having these workshops to understand why should we construct something different.
Yeah, my objection is that it's an easy answer to say that real costs of operating a power plant should be collected somewhere else without offering that somewhere else. If you want us to run our machines at full cost of service and bid in marginal energy at a marginal price, I'll be happy to do that all day. Absent that, we need to find a way for units to recover their real and measurable costs of maintaining the resource. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, Mark. All right. Anybody else have any comments, or we can move on to the next section? Okay.
This is Janet.
Yep,
this
please
is
go ahead.
Janet Phelps from. Are we still talking about major maintenance?
Please go ahead. Yep.
Okay. So this is Janet from PSE again. Your definition of major maintenance was specifically mentioned only the prime mover, and there are other parts of equipment that could have, that are significant, that could be considered major, such as the generators, the boilers, condensers, and whatnot. But you don't seem to include those in your definition of what qualifies as major maintenance. And that seems like a restriction.
Well, great. I mean, that's one of the things that we wanted to hear your feedback on, and get a sense of what those type of items be. So obviously it's not just the turbine that's spinning that should be recovered through major maintenance activity. I'm hearing from you that I think the generator, the boiler, condensers, are there any other big ticket items that you can see falling into that? We might cover this a bit later in the call, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts.
Cooling towers, fuel handling and forwarding equipment, exhaust cleanup systems, dams and waterways are a few other examples.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Moving on to the next section, we just wanted to discuss kind of the state of things right now with our VOM adder values. These values you see in the top table are the ones that are currently in place in our market. They were developed in 2011 and placed into the markets in 2012. The next table are the values that we proposed late last year. These were mainly focused on the consumables incurred at the plants, and so we just wanted to show these and discuss a little bit about our considerations of how we're going to develop these adders if we decide to change them. We like to set our default values at such a value that most generators for most technology types can fit into these categories, and have negotiated variable operation and maintenance adders be a small portion of resources, which is where currently things sit. Another consideration is at which level we'd like to group these at. Currently we group things in this gas resource type in combined cycle and combustion turbines and reciprocating engines. But you'll notice that the categories in our December 2018 report were at a lower level of granularity. So one thing that we're considering is it worth it to drill down further into these categories to flesh out the different costs while balancing the fact that that would mean we would have to reach out to resource, each and every resource type and update our master file for these changes. So we'd like to maybe just open the call up again to your thoughts on the values that we had previously proposed, as well as the ones that are currently in the market, and if anyone would like to comment on those two considerations that I just mentioned.
This is Susan Hilligan at Portland. We have a couple of resources that wouldn't fit in any of these categories. And I think just looking at it, your S and your H class are fairly close in your numbers, except in the combined cycle. Your LM versus your LMS are fairly close. I think you're just going to have to cut the baby in half. If you get too specific, everybody's going to want their own thing. And then what you're doing is you're just doing customized O&M adders at this point. Is the intention, this is the actual question, is the intention to add these to the tariff in replacement of the 280 and the 480?
We are considering that, but like I said, we definitely like to keep things from a cost-benefit perspective. It would make more sense to keep them at a higher level, as these already exist in our systems and have gone through kind of our master file process of getting into our system. And we definitely hear your comment on the fact that this may result in having to negotiate a number of these adders, which is something that we'd like to steer away from if possible. So I don't think the intention.
Back to my question, the 280 and the 480 are actually specifically called out in the tariff, are they not?
Yeah. Yes.
So are you going to strike them from the tariff and reference a table, or are you going to leave them in the tariff and have these as like a pseudo negotiation option or a first round of negotiation option? What is the intent with the existing rate?
Well, we intend to revise the default ones, which are in the tariff right now. We're just asking here whether the two categories is too simplistic right now and we should expand the categories, or whether we can just keep the two categories and update the dollar value for the default. Then once everybody knows the defaults, they can move to the negotiated if they need it.
Okay. Does anyone else have any comments? We received a number of written comments on the December 2018 values, which we've considered, and they kind of were part of the reason why we implemented these working groups in the first place, is to hear what you guys had to say on a verbal basis as well. So if anyone else would like to comment, if not, we can move on to the next section.
Yeah, this is Anita from Southern California, Edison. And so this proposed O&M, variable O&M cost from your previous study is that it's only for the consumables. So what are those like variable maintenance costs that we just discussed? So you're going to left it out? Or where can we capture those costs?
Right. Yes. Thanks for bringing that up. That's a good point, and I think we wanted to have these calls to understand what those variable other maintenance costs are, and we heard a little bit earlier that it seems that a lot of costs that are maintenance activities are typically associated with run hours and starts as opposed to, say, megawatt hours, and in that case they would fall into our major maintenance adder. So we'd like to hear from you guys as to what are those other variable maintenance activities that would fall into the bucket that would ultimately wind up in our VOM adder.
I think other has discussed like, I think other has mentioned that like those costs could be related to, you know, fixing the valve or the pumps, and other is not falling into major components.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Valves, pumps, it's good to hear. The intention is that we would update our VOM adder values to incorporate those other activities, but from our perspective, we just didn't have a great sense as to what those could be, and therefore couldn't factor them into our VOM cost adder values.
Hey, Anita, this is Jessica from DMM. I just wanted to ask a question for you. So for the pumps and valves that you're speaking to, from your perspective, would those, like, where would those fall into from either a per start per hour or per megawatt category? Like, regardless of the major maintenance or other definitions, major, minor, like, from your perspective, where is that incurred most appropriately?
This is a good question. I think other also mentioned that, you know, it has so, we can spread it out like dollar per megawatt hour that contributing to, you know, some parts failures. And but a lot of it is due to other mentioned like startups, number of startups, and you know, numbers of effective fire hours. So I will have to think about this a little. But yeah, but then we are just feeling that we don't know where to put it. If you're going to revise this variable O&M down to just consumables.
Yep. Well, this might be jumping ahead a little bit, but we will at the end of the call solicit your written thoughts on this and a number of other questions. So please do consider it, and we'd love to hear what you have to say. And yeah, that would be very much appreciated.
And I just want to add one more thing. I think this is where we're talking costs and adders. And so the adders is what our market design currently allows, is that we have a $1 per megawatt hour adder, a $1 per stack, and a $1 per run hour adder. But I think we're driving down to what are those costs, the maintenance costs that you face, and which adder types should they fit into. So that's where when we talk about costs, we're talking about your maintenance activities and the costs incurred, and are those as a result of run hours, start and then using that as a basis, trying to figure out which adder type they should fit into. So I think that's helpful is that let's focus on the costs first and try to figure out what costs are recoverable and what are they driven by, and then we'll kind of like group them together and fit them into our adder types to be considered in our market.
Okay.
This is Steve Yance with SCP. One thing that I didn't see here, you know, we've got a distinction between kind of the combined cycle plants that are out there, but some of us are on, like those of us in PG&E service territory are on kind of a local distribution system or the backbone system and take gas service at different pressures. So the gas compression cost might be drastically different between, you know, even the same type of frame F unit depending on where it's located and what sort of pressure you take service under.
Is that a fuel cost? Is that
it's not a fuel cost? It's actually the cost of maintaining the compressors and run hours.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
It's Mark. I think along those lines, I think that water costs change pretty dramatically from plant to plant. And I'd hate to see us, you know, because of water costs, negotiating each one individually. That brings me to a broader question about where we're headed with this. If, in fact, you know, you were to cut the variable O&M in half, would it make a material change to bid cost recovery? I mean, that is the only place I think that it comes in, right? Are we talking about reducing, you know, bid cost recovery by half or, you know, almost immaterially? Do we know that?
We're trying to, so variable operations and maintenance also goes into the default energy bid and the minimum load cost. We're just trying to accurately reflect the cost in the right components, whether it is, like we've been saying, the start or the run hour or the variable energy.
You know, I think I understand your objective. I'm just wondering whether the effort is worth it, given any impact that it's going to have on bid cost recovery. If you end up negotiating, you know, 40 or 50 or 90 individual variable O&M charges, is that where you want to head? It seems to me, you know, just basing it on how much impact it's going to have is a worthwhile exercise.
Yeah, we have this commitment to review it every 3 years, and that is what we're undertaking. And certainly major maintenance has evolved over that time period, and now our understanding of your costs are evolving over that time period. So we are just trying to, like we said, accurately reflect all the pieces in our 3-part bid.
Yeah, this is Steve with Puget Sound Energy again. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was saying hopefully we can come up with a methodology that will work over the long term, whether we do come up with default values and we, you know, escalate them based on a consumer price index or come up with a different schedule for review. I mean, yeah. I think our interests are aligned. But go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that on the variable operations cost portion of this, something that has come up for us has been on our E-Class simple cycle machines, and that we run a shoestring operation at those sites. But when they are dispatched and operational, we actually bring in additional personnel. And so we have incremental labor cost associated with running those units on a 24-hour basis, where normally we would just have, you know, 2, maybe 3 people at the most there during normal working hours. And would you envision being able to add those incremental labor costs to variable ops? I mean, it is something that we don't incur otherwise, and sometimes it's actually overtime that we incur.
And we would have to take that back. I've not seen labor, except for the labor involved in like a major maintenance activity being included. So we would have to take that concept back and think about it.
So you would bring these additional personnel on if you're, planning on being committed more frequently, or under what circumstances would you usually bring in these extra folks?
Right. We don't necessarily hire people to do this, right? But these might be people who are, number one, could be associated with a different facility that will come and help out, so to speak, after the normal day shift is over. And so they will be on site, through the night, basically staffing that facility, and it could be just 2 people through the night, or we could have people who are permanently stationed at that facility that will end up working longer hours. And so neither circumstance is one that we would see absent operations. And so these represent costs to us for operating the facility because we have such a small contingent of people there normally. And again, being simple cycle units, these are plants that may have a 10% capacity factor. And so as such, it just doesn't pay to have a large staff on site. And so we're going to pay people more, or we're going to bring people in when we are dispatched to run and staff that plant 24 hours. So it really is incremental labor, much in the same way as you would see incremental usage of your consumables for operating the facility.
But do we need to consider those when committing the resources? How do these resources get committed? Are they usually bidding into the market, or are they usually self-scheduling? Are those commitment decisions made outside the market?
Yeah, maybe another person from PSE can comment on how they're committed.
This is Paul Nichols from PSE. Yeah, I think what we're talking about here for this, if this is going to be part of the, let's say, in the min-load or something like that, then yeah, we would only be concerned about this for, commitment by the CAISO market, not something outside.
Well, I think, yeah, we look forward to some more comments on that, so that's the able to be included, and so we appreciate that feedback, and we'll.
Yeah, and if anyone else on the line wants to submit written comments on that, definitely be very receptive to those.
Hi, this is Lindsay Schluck.
Okay.
Sorry, did you?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay.
Nope, go ahead.
I have a question about the December 2018 numbers. Are these averages, or how did you obtain these variable O&M costs?
We hired a consultant to go do a survey of costs.
Okay.
And they used a variety of sources and, in some cases went out and, found out what the price was for ammonia for combustion turbines. And they used a variety of methods that I think are outlined in that original paper.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, so just in the interest of time, we've got about 10 minutes left, so I'll move on to the last point of discussion, and this is a partial list of activities that we, are looking at considering, and these came from a variety of different public sources and just kind of general engineering background. So you'll see that we've kind of bucketed it into separate types of activities, and they're kind of various components of a generator and activities as well. So just wanted to seed the discussion with a few questions. And, the next slide, we have a proposal of, maybe this is where each item should go, but it's in no means definitive. So just to see the discussion, are there any items here that you think clearly would fall into major or other? I think we've touched a little bit on that before. What, if any, activities vary between combustion turbines and combined cycle, as well as reciprocating and steam, between H-type and F-type? Maybe just get the group's thoughts on the list, and if we're missing anything, please raise those thoughts now.
So this is Susan again from Portland. So when you say other maintenance variable, is the assumption that it could be per megawatt hour, per start, or per hour, or is it just one of the ratios?
It could be any of the three.
Okay, thank you.
This is Jess Kuna from DMM. I was just going to add, it sounds like maybe also that stakeholders are commenting that they seem to bucket categories into corrective, preventative, I can't remember the other two, and preventative, and it might be helpful also, like if you all could include in any of your comments like how you would categorize each of these items into those three buckets or whatever those buckets are that you might be considering too.
Yeah, thanks.
Any other comments?
Yes, this is Ed Espinoza with PSC. Can you please clarify line item number 21, duct burners and liners?
So these would just be the duct burner. We pull these in from a number of different sources and don't have detailed understanding of what each item is. So it was more of just a category or high level,
Okay, so the liners do not refer to combustion liners.
Can you flesh out what a combustion liner is and whether that's different from a duct burner liner?
Well, yeah, combustion liner pertains to a gas turbine combustion hardware on the combustion hardware portion of the engine. And your duct burner, that's in your HRSG, where you just enhance the BTU content of the flue gas to, create more steam. So, yeah, they're definitely different.
Okay.
Just a little, I wasn't expecting to find those two together.
Yep, we can pull those out separately. Seems that they're different conceptually enough that we would need to consider those items separately. So thanks for that feedback.
Hi, this is Anita from Southern California, Edison. And so can you clarify the proposed VOM number? Is it including the yellow and the red items?
No, it does not include the red.
The red, but it's including the yellow?
So if you're talking about the VOM values that were in the December report, they were just consumables. And the response we got is that it includes some maintenance. And so the some maintenance I think we're trying to get to is the yellow highlighted. Are those the right other maintenance that is incurred with variable energy production?
Okay, thank you.
and this is Janet from PSC again, and I just want to affirm what I think I heard someone say a few minutes ago, that it's not necessarily what specific equipment, but whether it's done on a corrective basis because the equipment failed versus on a pre-scheduled basis that might determine whether it is fixed or variable.
Right, yeah, that was a very helpful comment that we'll have to take back. We didn't, in our research, we didn't run across those specific 3 categories, so we will. And yeah, and again, please send comments to that effect too.
You know, Steve with PSE, in looking at the list, you start out with the heading of inspections, repairs, overhauls, replacements. And as I go down the list, some of these, you know, might be major if they're repairs and overhauls or replacements, and they might actually fall into the other maintenance variable if it's an inspection. And when you ask us to go through and try to categorize these, would you like those categorized to include differences in the, you know, extent of work for an inspection and the downtime expectation versus a repair and overhaul? Because by definition, your major maintenance includes, you know, non-periodic activities that take place with a lengthy outage.
Yeah, that's a good point, and it's certainly something that we have been trying to suss out ourselves. So if inspection of a particular line item would, you know, if you would consider it to be major, then, you know, we would want to see that in kind of the green category here. Mm-hmm. So you can certainly consider them separately if you decide to submit comments on that. It's definitely up to you on that aspect.
All right, going through the list, I may have missed it, but I did not see like inlet chilling or chillers as a potential item.
Okay, that's great. Thanks. If anyone else notices anything that we've left off, please, you can submit those in writing. Just in the interest of time, we're running out of time. We've got about 2 minutes left, so I'm just going to move to the next steps and our final slide, which echoes a lot of what we've been saying during the call, which is to ask you all to take a step back and reflect on what we've discussed today and submit responses to what we've discussed today, which, as you know, is you know, which bucket to put these items in, and whether our buckets are kind of intuitively correct based on your understanding of the operation of your units. Any items that we're missing or updates to the verbiage of our definitions or conceptual changes to our definitions, as well as considering the categories and subcategories that we would look at these activities on and consider our our adder values and overall feedback on the stakeholder initiative and working group structure. So please, if you do have comments, send them to the email listed here. By the end of next week, we'd love to hear from you. And when you submit those comments, please indicate whether you'd like your comments to be confidential. The hope is that, you know, if you would like to submit your comments confidentially, you can go into greater detail. And, you know, if you'd like to submit specific cost, dollar value information, those types of things, do keep away from a public forum. So, yeah, thanks. I think that's everything that I have.
Okay, thank you everyone for joining.
This is Sherry Bentley. Can I ask a quick question?
Yes, please.
Hi. Oh, thanks. When, I'm sorry, I'm like Mark Smith, I'm in my car driving away from the CAISO. When would this be implemented? When would these new bombs go into effect?
We don't have a schedule for that as of yet. We're going to go through the stakeholder process and see where we land. So the current ones can stay in effect until then.
Okay. All right. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Eric.
Michael from CPS. I had a quick question. with some of the comments either being publicly disclosed or confidential, how do you ensure participants have a level set for costs as well as different vintage of a new LM 6000 compared to a integrated unit?
Yeah, I'm not sure we picked up everything there, but certainly your concerns about confidentiality will be heeded, and we'll make sure that anything that's marked confidential will be kept that way.
And how do we level set, given we might get some confidential numbers that we would need to consider in our default value? I think we would consider the gamut of comments that we get across all the stakeholders to try and figure out what is common across all of them and what needs to be considered. If it's a specific cost to a specific generator, that's something we wouldn't include in our default value. So I think we're looking for specific generator costs, but at the end of the day, we're trying to come up with a default value that would work for most of these generators. So when you do mark it as confidential, we will take that into consideration to see if it does fit only for your generator, if it applies to other generators as well. So this will be based completely on all the comments that we get and all of the research that we have done to try and figure out how do we determine these default values.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using AT&T Event Conferencing Enhanced. You may now disconnect.